St Ives, it will be quite bright for much of the time. There's a beautiful sunshine further south as well, and that's where you'll see the best of the temperatures, 25, maybe 26 Celsius again, 79 Fahrenheit. A little bit cooler around some of the coasts, again some sea breezes setting in, and we'll have a noticeable northeasterly wind for some eastern coast, so again, that'll push temperatures down to around 18 degrees. This is the sort of sun index, though, pretty high for many parts of England and Wales. Remember, you can find more details on CFAX 408. 5 or 6, and that's on a scale of 1 to 10, of course. And then into the weekend, well, high pressure just about hanging on, but it will gradually drift away northwards, and that'll allow these fronts to start to push in towards the south, giving that threat of showers. But as I said, it is going to be later on in the weekend, and most of us will get away with some fine weather. There will be a noticeable breeze, though. In fact, the breeze bringing quite a lot of low cloud and mistiness to eastern coastal areas. Otherwise, though, as I said, decent sunny spells and warmth, especially in the west.
Talking movies, the very latest film news direct from the US.
Join Tom Brooks Saturdays 4:30 and 10:30 on BBC News 24.
I'd say guilty, wouldn't you?
That's it, sir.
This Sunday, McCabe's past catches up with him in Badger at 8.
I don't know what this is about, but for your own safety, you have to go away.
Bizarre behaviour in Faulty Towers at 10 to 9, and it's not just Basil.
You all right?
Yes, thank you. Then at 9:25, does Charlotte have something to hide at the Border Cafe?
Let's chat about why a guy nothing happened with was writing new love songs.
Intrigue, comedy and passion for Sunday night on BBC One.
Good morning from BBC One Scotland. Now breakfast news with John Nicholson and Sarah Coburn.
Good morning and welcome to BBC's Breakfast News. The headlines so far this morning. Leaders of the world's richest 8 countries are meeting in Japan for the G8 summit. The agenda is expected to be dominated by reducing the debt of the poorest countries who are being crippled by their repayments. A new wave of job losses in Wales is said to be announced by Corus, the country's largest steel producer. And the Home Office has confirmed that an unmarked police car carrying the Home Secretary was stopped for speeding on the M5 motorway.
And the business headlines. America's top central banker sounds a positive note for the US economy, but warns he's keeping an eye out for inflation. And the fate of the Dome. The government prepares its announcement on the future of the Greenwich site.
The G8 summit of the world's leading industrial nations is getting underway on the Japanese island of Okinawa. High on the agenda will be the issue of alleviating poverty and combating disease in the developing world.
President Clinton arrived in Okinawa a day later than planned, his trip delayed by the near collapse of the Middle East peace talks. The world leaders have been accused of running away from controversy by choosing to hold their annual summit on such a remote island. But President Clinton also has to confront widespread opposition in Okinawa to the large American military presence here. He went straight to the Peace Park that commemorates the bloody battle that followed the American invasion in 1945. The leaders have set themselves an ambitious agenda. They're under pressure to do something to alleviate the blight of disease and poverty in the developing world.
This week, Prime Minister Mori is bringing the partners of the G8 to Okinawa to find ways to close the gap between the wealthiest and poorest nations of the world, and within nations between the wealthiest and poorest areas.
Some activists demanding the cancellation of third world debt have made the long and expensive journey to Okinawa. They say little has been achieved since the Rich Man's Club agreed in principle last year to write off the debts of the world's poorest countries. The Japanese have been doing their best to accommodate the pressure groups. They don't want a repeat of the violence that marred last year's World Trade talks in Seattle. The Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori is promising a big aid package to battle disease and boost information technology in the developing world. Tony Blair visited a local school the day after his arrival in Okinawa. He's chairing the session on debt relief. and is facing calls to break through the bureaucratic logjam that stalled the process so far.
The Japanese have brought in nearly 20,000 police from the mainland to help prevent protesters getting anywhere near the site of the summit. But the pressure groups can already claim a victory of sorts. They've helped to ensure that the gap between rich and poor countries is at the heart of the agenda at a meeting of the world's most powerful leaders. Charles Scanlon, BBC News, Okinawa.
Up to 1,300 redundancies are expected to be announced at steel plants in Wales later today. Corus, formerly British Steel, will make the cuts at its sites at Port Talbot, Llawen and Ebbw Vale.
In recent months, Corus, the company formerly known as British Steel, has been slowly but steadily reducing its workforce at plants throughout Britain. The high value of the pound, cheaper steel from overseas, and the decision by companies like Ford to reduce car production in the UK have all been blamed. Now it looks as though the axe is to fall on hundreds of jobs in the former steel heartlands of Llawen, Port Talbot and Ebbw Vale. Unions here say that more than 1,000 workers will be told they're being made redundant. The news could have been even worse, say the unions. At one stage, Corus had apparently contemplated closing the Llawen plant altogether, but Corus decided on spreading the job cuts across its British factories. Willa Davis, BBC News.
The Home Office has confirmed that the Home Secretary's car was stopped for speeding on the M5 motorway on the 9th of July. Jack Straw was travelling to a Labour Party event in the unmarked Jaguar, which was being driven by a special branch officer. The Home Office would not comment on newspaper reports that the car had been travelling at 103 miles per hour. Police in West Sussex are continuing their forensic examination of a shoe they think belonged to 8-year-old Sarah Payne. They hope it could provide vital evidence in the search for her killer. The shoe was found in a hedge near the village of Culham, less than 4 miles from the field where Sarah's body was discovered on Monday, close to the A29 near Pulborough. Sarah was last seen on Saturday the 1st of July near her grandparents' home in East Preston. Over the weekend, the police will widen their search for evidence in the surrounding countryside. A 41-year-old man from South Wales is being charged with the murder of his 12-year-old daughter. Emma Hall was found stabbed at her home near Tintern in Monmouthshire on Tuesday evening. Andrew Hall will appear before magistrates this morning. The General Medical Council will today start to consider whether an incompetent gynaecologist's actions amounted to serious professional misconduct. If they do, he could be struck off the medical register. Yesterday, the Council ruled that Richard Neal had committed a catalogue of surgical mistakes and also lied about his qualifications.
The case against Richard Neal began at the General Medical Council 5 weeks ago. A coachload of his former patients came down from North Yorkshire for the first day.
Mr. Neal, do you have anything to say?
Yesterday evening, it reached a critical point. The gynaecologist heard the disciplinary committee rule that almost all of the allegations against him were true. These included failing to stop bleeding after an operation, lying to a patient about the length of the waiting list to persuade her to go private, and operating without proper consent. He even screamed at this patient, Sheila Wright Hoagland, when she asked to see her medical notes. As well as the dozen women involved in these hearings, there are others who have also complained about the way he treated them.
Arrogant, very arrogant, very... Oh, he walked around with his nose in the air. And the first time I met him was when he did the urodynamics test, and he sat with his basically his back to me as I came in the door, looking at this machine.
The committee will now start considering whether these proven allegations amount to serious professional misconduct. If so, Richard Neal could be struck off the register for a minimum of 5 years. Whatever happens, this case will be a huge embarrassment to the GMC, because it failed to act against Richard Neal when he was struck off in Canada more than 15 years ago when one of his patients died. Daniel Sandford, BBC News at the General Medical Council.
The United States Congress has voted to ease the 38-year-old trade embargo against Cuba. The House passed amendments making it easier for Americans to travel to the island. It also relaxed the embargo on exports of food and medicine to Fidel Castro's government. Chickens bred to end up on dinner tables are far more likely to end up with serious health problems than has been previously acknowledged. An independent survey of the Danish poultry industry shows that chickens often get so fat that their legs are unable to carry them. Up to a third of all chickens could be prone to such potentially fatal conditions. The Australian government says it's nothing to fear when its record on human rights is examined by the United Nations today. The Prime Minister's wife, Sherry Booth, has been appointed to represent a number of Aborigines who claim their government is discriminating against them.
This is the battleground which Sherry Booth is now entering. It is the most emotive issue in Australian politics. The treatment of Aborigines, and in particular the tough prison policies now introduced in 2 parts of the country. Ms. Booth has helped prepare papers to the United Nations alleging breaches of international covenants on civil and political rights. Her opponents aren't taking a backward step.
We believe we don't contravene any international conventions, and even if we did, so what? I believe countries like Australia, who have a proud human rights record, should tell them to go jump.
Can everybody come in who's got caught now, please?
The Northern Territory is tough on crime. Commit 3 offences, however small, and you go directly to jail. Earlier this year, a 15-year-old Aborigine hung himself in prison. He'd been sent there for stealing some paint and some felt-tip pens. Opposition to the policy has been growing. Unable to change minds at home, protesters have gone to the UN and eventually to the home of Britain's Prime Minister.
We had been using a number of barristers and they gave advice to us that they thought Ms Blair would be willing to give advice for a very, very reasonable rate.
Sherry Booth's opponents are cynical about her motives. She will be in a direct confrontation with the Australian government.
Let her bring on the fight. The wife of the British Prime Minister is trying to get a high media profile.
The Northern Territory Police have an uncompromising reputation. No one in the Territory is in any mood to be browbeaten by a British barrister. Michael Peshart, BBC News, Sydney.
The funeral of Lord Robert Runcie, former Archbishop of Canterbury, will take place later this morning. Lord Runcie, who headed the Anglican Church from 1980 to 1991, died last week after a long battle with cancer. The service will take place at the Cathedral and Abbey in St Albans, where Lord Runcie spent most of the last years of his life. After 100 years, the smallest school in Wales closes today. Pembrokeshire County Council says it's uneconomic to keep it open. That's because there are now just 4 pupils at the Caldy Island School, and next term they'll be going to school on the mainland.
Caldy's linked to the mainland, the boat crossing which will bring the island's pupils back at weekends when they start their new schools next term. This time it's bringing the visiting music teacher for one of the last classes to be held on Caldy, at the 100-year-old school which has taught wartime evacuees, Emperor Haile Selassie's children, and more recently the sons and daughters of the island's farm workers. Their class teacher describes it as a dream job and regrets the closure.
There just aren't any children left to come into the school, and it's very sad, I think, for the island because there's an ageing population here and we're moving on.
For the children, their abiding memories will be of things they've done outside the normal curriculum.
Going out onto the island next to Caldy called St Margaret's and ringing birds. Building disaster camps outside school. And once we used the builder stuff to make one.
3 of the children will be going to secondary school on the mainland, 1 to a primary. All will be in considerably larger classes. Parents too will miss what Caldy offered.
There's been small classes there. It's been an interesting situation with many things out of the normal, as it were, for schools.
The school bell will ring for the last time today, and a chapter in Caldy's history will have closed. Jane Bennett-Powell, BBC News.
Now, as we've heard, the G8 summit of the world's leading industrial nations is getting underway in Japan. We can go now live to our correspondent Nick Robinson, who's there to give us the latest on the summit. Nick, good morning. Perhaps you could tell us what's on the top of the agenda for the G8 leaders this morning.
Well, top of the agenda is an attempt by this rich man's club to say we're not just here for our own rich populations. We've heard the criticisms. We want to reach out to the poor of the world and show that this club can do something for them. So there are really 3 Ds on the agenda: the issues of debt, the the issue of disease and what's called the digital divide, in other words, information technology. And what the leaders meeting here this afternoon want to show is they can do something for the rest of the world, and they argue, Tony Blair of course particularly, that this isn't just out of charity, it is in fact in the West's self-interest.
Now, you know, of course, what the critics say. They say there's a lot of hand-wringing and humbug at these summits. And that last year, for example, they made lots of grand pledges, £100 billion in debt write-offs. But the reality is they've only paid off £10 billion. So what they promised to do and what they actually do are very different things.
That's absolutely right, and Tony Blair, for that reason, is leading a discussion this afternoon on the issue of debt, but it's not clear to me that he will be able to change the reality. The rhetoric may be strong again. As you say, not only are the figures small, but the number of countries actually helped is far, far smaller than originally planned. Tony Blair has set himself a target of 20 countries that should be helped with its debt. The number so far is only 9, and only 1 is at all close to debt write-off. Now, the difficulty here is that people sometimes hide behind the American